Hey, it's Martine. So by now, you have heard about the great subscription deal that we've been offering. 99 cents can get you 4 weeks of The Washington Post. And that is what you can pay for an entire first year. Just 99 cents every 4 weeks. Today is the last day of this offer. So if you've thought for a while about becoming a subscriber, this is the time to do it. We have a link in our show notes, or you can go to washingtonpost.com/subscribe. We are so excited to welcome you as a supporter of the work that we do here at the Post, and we're so grateful. Okay, here's the show. TikTok thought it had made a deal that was too good for the U.S. government to pass up. TikTok would allow the American government to pick who it wanted to sit on its U.S. board of directors. It would allow U.S. officials to veto new hires. An American company could monitor its source code. There was even talk about giving the U.S. a kill switch, meaning if American officials felt that TikTok was a threat, they could shut it all down. This extraordinary proposal was made by TikTok 2 years ago. But the Biden administration didn't like the deal. They turned it down. And instead, this past April, President Biden signed a law targeting TikTok, which we've discussed on the show before. That law will force the app's Chinese parent company to either sell TikTok or face a ban in the U.S.
And so new details are coming out all the time about the long negotiation process that predated this law and what TikTok was promising the government in hopes of staying alive in the U.S.
The fate of TikTok has been up in the air for months.
So TikTok sued the Department of Justice and is fighting that law on First Amendment grounds, saying it's totally unconstitutional for the government to suppress a speech platform.
Drew Harwell is a tech reporter at The Post, and he has had a lot of questions about the case filed last month by TikTok and its parent company, ByteDance.
One was, the U.S. government has for years been saying that TikTok, because it is owned by a Chinese company, is a national security threat. They say all of these users put their data into the app, they watch videos, their behavior is folded into these profiles that TikTok can hold. Is that going to go to the Chinese government? Or is the Chinese government able to influence the recommendation algorithm of TikTok and, promote Chinese communist propaganda or suppress things that are good about the U.S.? Those are the main points that the government has been making. We haven't really seen evidence that either of those things are happening. The other part of it was, how is TikTok going to fight this? What are they going to say in defense of themselves? If they are going to remain, owned by a Chinese company, what kinds of assurances can they give, not just the government, but Americans that, they're going to protect their data? And are they going to be able to prove that to a judge or a panel of judges sufficiently enough to, sustain themselves in the American market?
And Drew says knowing more now about what was in that proposal a couple of years ago gives new perspective to everything playing out currently and what we could see happen in court. From the newsroom of The Washington Post, this is Post Reports. I'm Martine Powers. It's Monday, June 3rd. Today, Drew walks my co-host Elahe Izadi through the details of TikTok's offer, including that proposal to give the government a kill switch if things went south. He'll explain why the Biden administration decided to turn down that proposal and how it set up the existential legal fight that we're seeing play out now. I'll let Elahe take it from here.
Drew, I kind of want to rewind us a little bit and start at the beginning of what led up to this potential TikTok ban. And first of all, I think it's just worth noting that TikTok is a very popular social media app, right? Like, talk to me about when the government first started looking at TikTok as a possible security threat and the influence that TikTok has in the American public.
Yeah. So a lot of this started happening 5 years ago in 2019. That's when the US government said they were going to start investigating TikTok officially. TikTok had sort of come on the scene very quickly. It started as this app called Musical.ly, which was all just lip syncing songs and dancing. And it was known as this kind of, kiddie, youth dancing challenge app that people didn't take seriously. But it very quickly, became this just cultural juggernaut. And it was really having this huge impact on popular music, memes, trends. Things were going viral on TikTok all the time. And there was a sense that it kind of came out of nowhere, but it was a very quick sort of turnaround. And it really sort of made Facebook and YouTube have to compete on this platform that they never had to compete on before in terms of social media. So, around 5 years ago, when TikTok was really starting to become big, the US said, this Chinese ownership is something we can't stand. It's something we're really worried about. Obviously, the US government has been talking about China being a threat to America for a long time. We know that the Chinese government is very suppressive on their domestic internet. They have the Great Firewall of China. They censor American social media apps over there very, very rigorously. So there was concern that you have this extremely popular Chinese-sourced app that is, taking over schools across the country. Are we happy or comfortable with that? And what can we do to investigate this company and see whether it's following the laws or whether we need to pass some sort of ban on it?
Okay, so talk to me about how these concerns escalated. What did that escalation look like?
Yeah, so it started at the official investigation level. There's this group called CFIUS, which is the Committee on Foreign Investment in the U.S.
That's quite an acronym.
Yeah, CFIUS. It's one of those very technical, shadowy groups inside the government that's made up of a lot of officials and lawyers from a bunch of different agencies, Treasury, Justice, and they review foreign business deals for national security concerns. So this was to have CFIUS start investigating TikTok in 2019 was a big deal. And from there began this period of negotiation where the government would go to the table with representatives from TikTok and its owner, ByteDance, and they would say, prove to us that we can trust you. And TikTok started preparing this proposal that they called Project Texas that would have had all of these remedies for the government's concerns. And they prepared that document basically hand in hand with the government. They formally submitted it in 2022. And after that, the government basically said, no, it's not enough. All of the things that you've prepared for us in terms of reforms, we don't think are going to get us to a place where we feel comfortable about you still existing in the US. So that's when the government started pushing, this more scorched earth option where we now have a law that says ByteDance has to either sell it or have it banned and go from there.
So what was on the table? Talk me through what you've learned in your reporting about what TikTok proposed and what was on the table and what did the government walk away from?
Yeah, so TikTok prepared this proposal, Project Texas, that was really unlike
Project
anything.
Texas, that's what it's called? Why is it called Project Texas?
They called it Project Texas, one, because it's a great American name, right? This is a company that's trying to adopt this mantle of, hey, we are a friendly company to the American government. So they call themselves Project Texas. The Texas part of it comes from this other American company, Oracle, based in Austin, a tech giant that has a lot of Defense Department contracts. TikTok basically said, as one of the many pieces of this proposal, we're going to treat Oracle basically as our babysitter. We're going to put all Americans' user data on Oracle servers that are based in the US. We're going to open our entire source code, which is, millions of lines of code, everything that the app is built on, to Oracle engineers who can review the code and tell the US government if they see something, nefarious. And beyond that, they also, They suggested some things that I think we have never seen any company, let alone in social media, propose to the government. TikTok basically said to the US, we will create a totally separate US subsidiary that won't be accountable to our Chinese owners, but will be actually accountable to a board that the government decides.
Wait, the government is deciding the board of a private company?
TikTok might nominate him, but the government could veto or decide basically the leaders of this company.
And what else in this proposal stood out to you that you thought was pretty drastic and was giving the keys over to the U.S. government in some ways or providing an unprecedented amount of oversight of a private company?
Yeah, so beyond the oversight, I mean, they also said the government could choose all of their hiring rules. That, TikTok said, government, if you want all of our employees to be U.S. citizens, we will consent to that. If you want to have background checks of everyone we hire in the U.S. arm, that's cool. If you want to be able to veto anyone we hire, like if we find an engineer we want and you say we don't like that guy, you can veto that person. So again, I mean, that would be the government really getting into the nitty gritty of how a company is run. It's not how companies operate in the U.S. I think the biggest thing that stuck out to me was TikTok proposed to the U.S., okay, even if all of these things aren't sufficient, we will give you a legal shutdown option. If you don't like us, you can just hit this kill switch and we will shut down in the US. I think that's just extraordinary. I mean, imagine Facebook or Mark Zuckerberg saying, if the US doesn't like us, you can shut us down.
Why would TikTok give the US government so much control?
They felt like they had no other option. Their back was up against the wall. And so they felt like maybe we can prove ourselves to them and sustain ourselves in this country. I mean, this is a company that has never had any real level of trust in the US. The China tie has always overshadowed everything they've done, rightly or wrongly. And they feel like, we are in total survival mode. We just have to propose whatever we can to get the US government on our side, to give us even just an inch of trust. And a shutdown option was basically as, severe as you can get.
And Drew, why is it so important for TikTok that it is still able to operate in the United States?
It's a big market, right? I mean, the U.S. is not just a financially a lucrative market, but it's also, when you think about global culture, a lot of the culture does still happen in the U.S. For them to separate the U.S. from the rest of the world, as they say, it's not just that Americans would not see videos from around the world. The rest of the world would not see Americans' videos. And that would make the whole enterprise basically less interesting. But I think a lot of it just comes from the financial part of it. ByteDance and TikTok have invested a lot of money to be a big app in the US. They are still one of the world's biggest apps. They are neck and neck with Instagram and YouTube all the time in a lot of different measures. And, ask any American kid these days, TikTok is one of the most vital parts of their life. So,
or senior citizens. There's a lot of people in TikTok who are older too.
That's totally true. Yeah, every age range. And so, they don't want to give that up. And they feel like, TikTok could continue growing. We've seen all of these social media apps just become giants. I mean, these Silicon Valley companies are trillion-dollar companies at this point. So to give that up based off of government consideration, they just feel like they're going to keep tossing money at the problems. They're going to keep paying for lawyers and policy people and lobbyists because they don't want to sacrifice what could be this huge payday.
I don't know, Drew, hearing you describe this proposal that was on the table a couple years ago, it seems like a pretty good deal and one that maybe would be more surefire than this court case now that who knows what the outcome will be. Why did the government walk away? What do we know?
That is the big question. I've heard a couple different things. One was the government felt like as long as there is one iota of connection between this Chinese company and TikTok, we're never going to get to a point of trust or certainty. And there were some people who felt like, yeah, it's a good deal now, but in 10 years, are we going to take our eye off the ball? Are we going to stop, inspecting it as closely? And TikTok will have its way, and we're back to the square one of the problem. A senior Biden administration official basically told me that, we had considered the offer and, more than a year ago, we decided it still wasn't enough. We told them it was insufficient, that we still had these national security concerns. And no matter what was in the deal, we still felt like it wasn't going to get us to a point where we could trust this app. I've also kind of heard, this sense from inside the government that maybe they don't want this kind of power, right? This is a lot of responsibility. This is a
interesting.
The government government is not skilled at doing this, right? This is a private tech company that is, very cool. It's very stylish. It has a lot of like things going for it in commerce and fashion and style. These are not federal
like bureaucratic sort of
bureaucratic skill set, right?
Right.
And even, the code base of this is extremely complex. Like, it doesn't seem like it when you open up TikTok and just start scrolling videos, but the way that the algorithm learns different profiles and suggests videos, it's all very complicated. So there is sort of a feeling of, do we want this responsibility? And do we want to be accountable if something does go wrong in the future? Or do we want to just say, cut this thing off and move on? And so, but you're right. I mean, there were risks on both sides. These 5 years of negotiations, during that time, TikTok has exploded. I mean, its user base has basically doubled in that time. And so if the government really is concerned about this being a national security threat, they've basically had to, sit on their hands and allow TikTok to grow and get even bigger. And then, if the case goes to the Supreme Court and they lose there, we'll be back to square one. And so, it was a risky decision for the government to go this way and to say, we're not even going to try a plan like this. We're not even going to pursue, a regulation. The government regulates companies when they have concerns. And in this case, they just went the nuclear option and just said, no more TikTok.
After the break, Elahe and Drew talk about whether Project Texas could strengthen TikTok's case against the Biden administration. We'll be right back.
What have experts told you about the viability of this law?
Yeah, so there's a lot of skepticism about this law. Back in 2020, Trump tried his own ban and forced sale of TikTok.
Look, it can't be controlled for security reasons by China. Too big, too invasive, and it can't be. And here's the deal. I don't mind if, whether it's Microsoft or somebody else, a big company, a secure company, very, very American company, buy it.
And it basically got shut down in court immediately. Since then, there have been some states that have also tried to ban TikTok. Montana was the first to try and ban it for its citizens. Another federal judge in that case said, this law violates the Constitution in more ways than one.
It seems like everything that the Attorney General argued at hearings and in public statements are directed to, we're going to teach China a lesson, not we're going to protect people.
So, this law comes into its background is one of basically government failure to restrict this app. And so there was some feeling, the folks I've talked to believe that it's going to be a big stretch for the government to be able to prove that this time it's different. And yet, the law Biden signed is a little different. It offers a forced sale as an option as opposed to just a strict ban. It was passed by Congress as opposed to just sort of an executive order that Trump passed himself. And it has some technical quirks, I guess you could say, that some people think will allow it to sort of sustain a court challenge better than the others. So we're just going to see. I mean, this is an unusual case because the law as written and as Biden signed it basically says there's only one court where this law can be challenged. It's the D.C. Circuit Appeals Court. They look at a lot of the constitutional challenges when agencies fight amongst themselves, basically. So they're going to come to it from a different standpoint than some of the other judges in the past. So I think the First Amendment is going to be a big challenge for the government here. Can they prove that shutting down this speech platform is worth it? Basically, I mean, is the threat that big that 170 million Americans will lose a place that they use, to express themselves?
So I'm now wondering whether the fact that TikTok made a proposal, in Project Texas in 2022, TikTok said, look, we'll make these changes. The fact that TikTok said that, could that now impact the outcome of this pending case?
Yeah, totally. So I think it's going to be a really important part of this case because this is going to be a First Amendment battle. TikTok is saying you're suppressing us in the same way that the government might suppress a bookstore or a publisher. That is a clear violation of free speech protections. And part of the First Amendment considerations at the court level is the government applying the least restrictive means to accomplish its goals. The government is within its rights to protect Americans' national security, and yet when it gets into a realm where they're restricting what people can say, how they can say it, that's where we get into this very core constitutional argument. So TikTok is going to say, you're not using the least restrictive means. You're shutting us down. That's about as restrictive as it can get. And we offered you a less restrictive option, which was this proposal, this Project Texas, where we would change things about our business that would, in a way that would satisfy everything that you have been scared about. And yet you ignored that option and disregarded it in favor of a very restrictive ban. So I think that's going to be something that will be considered by the judges. Was there some avenue that we could have protected Americans' right to speech while also satisfying the government? And that has come up in the other TikTok cases back dating to the Trump years. Was there a less restrictive way to accomplish the American goal?
I mean, Drew, what I'm hearing you say is the existence of Project Texas makes the case that TikTok is waging right now stronger, that there was an option on the table that was less restrictive and the government didn't pursue it. So it makes me wonder if there are legitimate concerns from the government, like national security concerns that can't be made public.
Yeah, I think it does help TikTok's case. And, the government is saying it's insufficient, but they haven't really shown why this plan was not enough. Part of the government's challenge has been that some of what they have about TikTok is classified at this point. We know that TikTok, the government has said we have these data privacy and propaganda concerns. We're scared about China, but we can't tell you everything we know about the intelligence on China or the intelligence on TikTok. Now, the government has held these classified briefings for all 500 and some members of Congress. And some of the members have come out of those briefings and said, what we heard is concerning to us. We are worried about a social media app that's based in China. And among the people who were saying that were, members of Congress like Republican Senator Ted Cruz of Texas.
I'm concerned about Chinese surveillance and espionage. TikTok is controlled by the Chinese Communist government. It has 170 million users in the United States, and it gives the Chinese government the ability to monitor, number one, what they're saying, number two, their physical location using GPS, number three, potentially what they're searching for and what they're doing with their phone. All of that is concerning.
But there have also been members who have come out and said, this doesn't change our minds. We still feel like Americans should have a right to choose the place where they want to spend their time and express themselves. And we've heard that from people like Democratic Representative Robert Garcia from California, for example.
A lot of us attended a classified briefing today on TikTok from a national security perspective. My opinion going into the briefing was to not support a ban, but I wanted to hear the information. My opinion, leaving that briefing, has not changed at all.
So from talking to many of these members who have gotten these briefings, the one thing that has come out from both of them is there is no smoking gun. There is no piece of evidence that the U.S. has that shows, we can prove that the Chinese government was influencing ByteDance in this way to the worst case scenario, basically. Now, maybe that could happen in 5 or 10 years, but that's where it gets into that speculative point of is speculation about a potential thing that could happen in 10 years enough to shut down a platform that so many Americans use right now.
So since this law has passed, has TikTok done anything has it changed its business practices? Has it made any changes?
Yeah, TikTok has said they have continued to do a lot of the things they proposed in Project Texas just voluntarily, proactively, moving Americans' user data into U.S. servers, hiring a lot of mostly Americans, but some Brits and Australians into this U.S.-based subsidiary that controls all of the U.S. operations. Some of the human resources functions are handled by ByteDance right now. They're trying to move those to the American level. So they're trying to do all of these things proactively that they feel like make them look as friendly as humanly possible.
Mm-hmm. So, Drew, now we're where we are. Why do you think it matters that TikTok made this proposal and the Biden administration rejected it in favor of pursuing a law? What does that tell us? What's revealing about that to you as you follow this story?
Yeah, so it's revealing of a couple things. One, again, just how desperate TikTok was. And it also, I think tells us something about the government in this age of the internet where we have this rising China that the government is worried about. We have this internet that gives everybody in Washington anxiety because they don't know how social media works. They're worried about, addiction and data privacy concerns and surveillance and propaganda. So TikTok has really just become symbolic of a lot of those anxieties. I also think it's important because it's 2024. We have in America really, I guess, taken for granted for many decades that all of the social media apps we used were American made, mainly made by a bunch of people in California and Silicon Valley. We're now to a point where there's a whole world of developers and engineers making products that we might like on the internet, and they might not all be American. And if we get to a point where we're only trusting people who come from the same country as us, we're going to be backing ourselves into a corner, and we're going to potentially be losing out on, the real innovation that we've enjoyed in technology. There will be another cool foreign app. There will be another, whether it's Chinese or not, there will be something that people in America will want to use and will find value in. And if the government's position is just going to be, we're never going to trust you no matter what you suggest, no matter what you offer, I think that's a concerning threat to not just sort of our basic values of free enterprise, but just how we'll enjoy the internet and whether it's a place where we can find, real joy in the future.
Well, Drew, thank you so much for making time and explaining all of this.
Thank you.
Drew Harwell covers tech and social media for The Post. He spoke with my co-host, Elahe Izadi. Before we go, here are a couple other stories I've got my eye on today. Mexico just elected its first female president. Claudia Sheinbaum is a scientist and the former mayor of Mexico City. She won in a landslide.
Vamos a mantener un gobierno del pueblo, por el pueblo y para el pueblo.
In her victory speech on Sunday night, Sheinbaum said, "We will maintain a government of the people, by the people, and for the people." This is a major moment in the fight for gender parity in Mexico, which for years had been known as a bastion of machismo. But now women hold half the seats in Mexico's legislature, and women lead Mexico's Supreme Court and central bank. And on another note, here is a thing I spend a lot of time complaining about: how loud restaurants are these days. Seriously, I find myself more often than not sitting down for a nice, quiet meal and hearing something like this.
Okay, I just got 80.
It's just when we talk.
Mine is 83.
Damn loud.
Yeah.
Wow. Spiked to 87.
Are you recording this tonight?
Those are my colleagues, Tom Sietsma and Bishop Sand, and they have been trying to get answers on this. Why restaurants seem so loud these days? Part of the answer could be that we all just got used to quieter environments during the pandemic. And it's a real problem. Multiple studies show that prolonged exposure to noise has physical effects such as increased anxiety and fatigue. But the good news is that there are some possible solutions, ways to design restaurants differently to quiet the noise, and even the potential for a standardized system for rating restaurant noise. The whole story is fascinating and something that you'll definitely want to share with friends and family members who are also sound sensitive. We'll put a link to that story in our show notes and at postreports.com. That's it for Post Reports. Thanks for listening. Don't forget, today is your last chance to take advantage of a great subscription deal. You can find the link in our show notes and at washingtonpost.com/subscribe. Today's show was produced by Rennie Svirnovsky. It was mixed by Sean Carter and edited by Lucy Perkins. I'm Martine Powers. We'll be back tomorrow with more stories from the Washington Post.